Hey everyone, we are continuing our mentor series with another clip from Nicole. Now, if you're new, Ashley is a friend of mine who has mentored me in living a lifestyle of rest, and we had a very rich conversation all about rest. What is it? What it's not? Most importantly, how do we live in it? We've been promised it, so how do we walk in it? And I've loved the conversation that has been kind of spurred by these clips that I've been sharing. The reason I continue to share clips from the conversation is because, quite honestly, I think a lot of us move away from things way too quickly. It's like we hear a message and then it's on to the next thing, on to the next message, on to the next truth, on to the next revelation. And as a community, I would love for us to sit and soak in this revelation on rest. What Ashley shares about today is about resistance to rest. What is that? Why do we face resistance and what do we do about it? She shares some really amazing truth about our identities that may be challenging for some of you. Maybe it's the first time you've heard any of this, but it is oh so transformative. So stay tuned for that clip. In the description, be sure to check out the link for the full conversation that you can watch at any time. There's also references to all the scriptures that we mention in our episode today, and there's a link to Ashley's website so that you can connect with her directly and all of her resources. It's so powerful what you're sharing. You mentioned James, who talks about don't be double-minded, don't be unstable. And so this comes down to identity. It comes down to what we choose to believe about God, and then how that informs us about who we are. So it all comes down to identity. And why this is so important, again, I talked about, I used to believe that belief was a feeling. So I thought I was always looking for the motivation or the inspiration, not bad things. But the problem is they do not do well up against resistance. And so when we come into resistance of any kind, if we're bound by natural intellect, if we're making ourselves subject to emotion, again, not bad things, not things to be ignored, we're just not subject to those things.
Correct.
We'll talk a little bit about realms maybe later in this conversation. But first I want to talk about resistance, because there's always going to be that resistance, and choice is what really moves us forward past resistance, And that's because, and you really helped me see this, Ashley, God takes two things very, very seriously. The first is separation, and the second is free will. It's choice. We have been given choice so that we can have dominion as sons of God here on earth, to unlock creation from frustration and put on display the glory that's in us, that's to be revealed to creation. So let's talk a little bit about resistance, because guarantee people are listening right now and they are feeling inspired and they're feeling motivated, but I don't want them to walk away from this conversation, hit resistance, and then it all goes out the window. So let's talk about resistance. Let's maybe talk about how we can identify it, how we recognize it, and then what we do about it, how we can shift into rest so that we live there and don't just visit it.
Yeah, so it's interesting that because we are the new man, and the new man, according to Paul, has never sinned. That's what Paul says. He says that he who is born of God, it is impossible for it to sin. Oh, I'm sorry, not Paul. John. It's mentioned in 1 John. It says that it is that he who is born of God, meaning born of spirit, cannot, in other words, impossible for him to sin. So that in the new man, we're always at rest. In the new man, we're always abiding in Christ. Christ can have nothing corrupt within him, and we are always, always there. That means it's our default state. That means it is very, very hard. In fact, it is literally impossible for our spirit man, which is the one part of us that's united with Christ. It's literally impossible for it to sin. And like you mentioned, we'll be talking about the three realms in a minute, so I won't go too deep into that. But I do just kind of want to point out that that is the basis for me to be able to say that is our default state, to be at rest, to always believe our Father, to always love our Father, to always receive all of his gifts. That is our default state. So the fact that we're in resistance is not natural. It is not normal. So we can think that, sin and doing the wrong thing is my default state, and I'm trying really hard to do the right thing. It's the opposite. God says that no, your default is to actually always be pure and holy and connected, and abiding in me. So the thing is that if we're not in rest, we're in resistance. We're actually in active resistance. The nice thing to know is that, again, rest is our default state, so we don't have to feel burdened by this knowledge that, oh my word, if I'm not in rest in a particular area, I'm in active resistance. There's no reason to feel shame or condemnation, according
Romans
to
8, there's no
that's right.
condemnation for those that are in Christ. Absolutely.
That's right, Romans 8:1. And so there's no need for any of that, but I do want to mention that if we're not in rest, we are actively resisting. There's no neutral ground. And resistance is simply born of, or it simply is unbelief. Because our natural state is to believe God. And so we're not believing Him. That's actually resisting something that comes very naturally to us. So the way that I actually realize that I am in a state of unrest, and the I don't know, the indications that I give to other people of what it is that they can look for to know whether or not they're in unrest, is basically any truly negative feelings. Now, there's nothing wrong with negative feelings themselves, because understand that they're just a thermometer telling us what it is that we're actually believing at the time. So I'm not trying to, shame us for our feelings. God only creates good things, and He created those feelings. Like He created anger, He created all those things. The thing is, what are those negative feelings saying? Why are we having those negative feelings? For instance, fear, anxiety, confusion. If we just feel like there's a whole bunch of noise, if we just kind of feel like we're in that there's a whole bunch of like chaos going on within our soul or within our mind, negative feelings that are pulling us down. That's very different than something like self-righteous anger, which God says is fine, or the fear of the Lord. Those are different, because even though we could think of them as negative because, oh, it's fear and it's anger, they don't weigh us down like things as do things such as regular fear, when you're actually scared of something, or like I said, anxiety, stress, those types. If you're feeling a heaviness in the negative feeling, it means that there's something that God has said is true that we're not actually believing, because God says that there is no reason to fear. Perfect love, which He has and gives to us, is His perfect love, casts out that fear. And then He said, be anxious for nothing, et cetera, et cetera. He said that there's no need for that. So if we are experiencing that, there's some aspect in which we're not believing God, which is actual resistance. So that's what resistance. So that's how resistance ends up showing up in our life, and how we can tell, like in a moment, okay, am I in rest or unrest? Or what could kind of prompt us to choose to shift into rest, because we're suddenly finding ourselves in a situation in which we've realized, oh, wait, I've got this heaviness to me. That means that there's an aspect of the freedom that God is inviting me into that I'm not choosing to step into, because I'm feeling heavy, and He's given me the opportunity to shift.